listener production.
Hey, welcome to the Weekend Briefing. I'm Antoinette Lattouf. From play school to better homes and gardens, Noni Hazlehurst has been a beloved fixture in Australian home for decades. As an actor, a director, a storyteller, activist and a national treasure, she has worn so many hats. But off-screen, she says that these hats were more like masks, concealing her true self to fit the roles that others expected of her. In this really deeply personal and reflective conversation, Noni opens up about her journey to self-discovery and for the first time shares her MeToo moment when a senior entertainment executive locked her in a room, changing her perspective forever. Noni has also penned her memoir, A Place to Call Home, which I highly recommend. And later in the show, we'll be making more recommendations when my producer extraordinaire, Helen Smith, joins me for the weekend list. And that's where we give tips on what to watch and see and do and eat and listen to and everything in between. But first, my chat with Noni Hazlehurst. Noni, welcome to the Weekend Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
Noni, when you sit down to pen your memoir, there's so much to celebrate in what has been an incredible career. It's also a time of reflection about the state of the arts and the industry. But I guess it's also an opportunity for you to look at your life or missed opportunities or things you would have perhaps done differently. What would you say is your biggest regret?
My biggest regret, I think, is that being a bit of a Pollyanna in terms of trusting people has led me to trust some of the wrong people. But I still maintain that optimism that basically people don't have an agenda to do me wrong. But, you know, I've been pretty naive in a lot of personal situations.
Yeah.
My career I've always felt quite firm about, but my personal life less so.
And it's interesting when I look at the world of memoirs, and there are quite a few people who write their memoirs. And I've seen some people like in their 20s write a memoir. I wonder if you'd been asked at earlier stages in your career to pen your memoir, or whether you think there should be an age cutoff. Because maybe I'm a little bit judgmental because I'm like, memoir at 22, I don't know what you have to impart with, to the world at the age of 22.
Well, I think confidence is something you're imparting if you've got a memoir going at 22. Right. And if you've had such a full life, you can fill a book. Good on you. Yeah, look, from my point of view, it's really, I want more women to write their stories because when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, there were almost no books that I read by women apart from Enid Blyton and the Brontes and the odd Austen. But all the books that were part of my education were written by men about men and for men, and women were just lucky enough to get an education, if we were lucky, to be part of the story or to see them, read the story. So I'm interested I love reading autobiographies and memoirs because I really think it helps you to connect with other people and to realise that you're not alone, which is, after all, the function of the arts, to connect people. So I really wanted to set down a journey because I think seeing other people's life journeys and hearing them is important, especially with families being so fractured and, the neighbourhood being so fractured. COVID changed that to some extent where we actually needed each other and saw each other for a while. But in general, we don't have a lot of storytelling as part of our daily lives, and I think we miss a lot of connections because of that.
And your memoir is called Dropping the Mask. What mask did you wear most?
The mask of being what people expected of me.
What was that?
To be pleasant and submissive to some extent as a female.
Grateful?
Grateful, I guess. Well, just not ungrateful.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right.
Look, I learned at a very early age that I saw my parents put a mask up when they went out. And so I learnt from birth almost that you have to behave. And obviously, yes, you do to be socially acceptable to some extent. But it was a very long time before I realised that I was finding it easier to play characters than myself because I hadn't been seen for myself. I was always moulded. to behave in a certain way. And it took me a long time to realise that it was okay to have an opinion. It was okay to offer an opinion. I remember I questioned my father's pronouncement about something once, and I was about 17, and he said, "Oh, what have you been reading now?" So it was very much, and it wasn't nasty. It was just, this is the best way to go about things. And in fact, they were highly moral and loving people and non-discriminatory and gentle and humble and all those things that were so valuable to me. But they had a worldview that was imposed on me, and I bought it because I didn't have any other family or siblings around to compare. I think I was 12 before I stayed over at someone else's house. So, there was no family other than mum and dad and I. And so I didn't have any other comparisons. So, that was the thing that I was taught. And now as I get older, and I think it's one of the few benefits of getting older, if you're lucky, that it doesn't matter. People are not judging you. They don't care. So if you want to say something, just say it, and
they are judging you though, or maybe you care less if they judge you as you get older.
Well, they're not judging me. They're judging what they think I am.
Yeah, right.
Because they don't know who I am really. They know what I present. So judgment is futile in a sense. But I think walking in someone else's shoes for a mile, which memoirs and autobiographies can do, or characters in a play can make you do, to drop that judgment and just see past the mask that someone's presenting to see the human being underneath. It's complex and layered and traumatised to some extent, as we all are, and just recognise that we all share those truths in our lives.
In your book, you do write about your family, that you're a fourth-generation artist. So tell me about your family history and also how they would have responded if you came home at 18 or 17 and was like, I'm going to be an accountant or work in IT. I mean, no shade on either of those industries, but it's certainly not what was in the family.
No. Well, I was lucky enough to be a subject on Who Do You Think You Are, and found out some gobsmacking stuff about my maternal great-grandfather, who at the age of 6, that his family migrated from Ireland during the potato famine to England, and he was discovered busking on the side of the Thames by one of the Hanlon brothers, and the Hanlon brothers had the most famous aerial trapeze act in the world in those days, the late Victorian era. And he was taken to America. I don't know whether he was stolen, sold, I don't know how he got there, but he was renamed from Paddy Carmody, he was renamed Little Bob Hanlon, and became the first person to be flung from one trapeze artist to another. And in those days, they didn't have nets. They had a bunch of people running around with a blanket underneath. And the act ended with him being dropped 40 feet. So he toured Europe, he toured America. He met his wife when they were in a huge, I suppose, a theme park. In Victorian times, people would go to these enormous parks and there'd be entertainments of all kinds. And he met his wife at one of them, who was a ladies' chariot racer, which meant that she was in a sort of Grecian gown in a very flimsy little Ben-Hur type chariot, being pulled by 3 or 4 horses around a circuit, so incredibly dangerous. They married. They had 4 children who he trained to have their own act, the Flying Julians. He and his wife split, and he took up with a sharpshooter, who was one of the most famous beauties in Europe. I mean, the most amazing stuff. And I'm going, why didn't I know any of this?
Yeah, right.
Then my mother and her sister were the sort of what we call the Tada girls for their father's act. And then she ran away from home to join the circus and became a dancer and sort of panto leading lady, and met my father when they were on the same bill. He was a singer and comedian. So I really was doomed. I didn't have a choice. It didn't occur to me to do anything else.
It was in the blood. It was in the genes.
It was absolutely in the genes. And so, I just didn't occur to me to do anything else.
You've routinely cited Play School as your proudest sort of body of work. You hosted Play School from 1978 to 2001. One thing I did find interesting is that despite having a 30-odd page Play School script, in the earlier years there was no auto cue. So you just had to memorise everything, which is really quite the feat. For anybody who works, I've worked in television for many years, I mean, that is quite the feat to not have an auto cue for such a long time.
Yeah, because you're not engaging with the child behind the lens if you have an auto cue. You're only engaging with the words. Yeah. But we used to rehearse it 3 times a week before taping, and then twice on the day before taping. and we taped it as live. So they didn't want us to stop tape for any reason. They wanted us to model problem solving or adapting to whatever was happening. And so having that many rehearsals, it kind of cemented the script to some extent. But yes, you did have to learn it. And I think in the last one I did, it was a new regime. It wasn't broken, so someone new came in and fixed it. And instead of taping it as live, it was broken up into segments.
Right.
Which I don't understand because it stopped that kind of organic ebb and flow of the energy in the program. And it also meant they had to edit it, so it cost more money to produce. Go figure. So it all became a little bit perfect and a little bit, less organic is the only word I can think of. But yes, it absolutely gave me a whole different direction in my work and in the kinds of things that I wanted to support and to be an advocate for, and that was young children.
And you've obviously worked in film and stage and television. Why is it that play school sticks out to you as the sort of favourite part of your career?
I guess because of the impact that it had on my ability to communicate. Because I've maintained that if you can hold the attention of a 3 or 4-year-old through a camera.
The hardest audience, really.
The hardest audience in the world. And so it taught me the difference between performing and playing. And my favourite co-host, my favourite, was John Hamblin, who died just a couple of years ago. And when I first started, he seemed to be very slack. He wouldn't be word perfect. And, the words were camera cues. So you had to sort of try and get it right. And I tried to compensate for what I perceived to be his shortcomings. And I was quite, school headmistressy and a bit precious. And then I saw a program with he and I back and I got it. He was just being.
Yeah.
He was playful. He was alive. And when you've done it 5 or 6 times, you've rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it. And then I was performing. So I saw the difference between just playing and occasionally he did say the wrong thing. But he did it with such freshness and aliveness. He was in the moment, which is sort of the holy grail for performers. And it stopped me being afraid of cameras because traditionally actors ignore cameras. They're not playing to that pair of eyes. But it also taught me that in radio or on television and in life, you're only talking to one person at a time. One pair of eyes is watching you, one set of ears is listening to you. So even if you've got a mass audience, they're receiving it on an individual basis. So it really taught me so much about, again, dropping masks and dropping inhibitions. And it also taught me something that was revelatory to me because my father was a perfectionist. If I got 98 out of 100 for an exam, he'd say, what happened to the other 2%?
Oh my gosh, my mum would say the same thing.
Exactly. So the play school mantra is practice makes progress.
Yeah.
And that there's no such thing as perfection.
Yeah.
And that was like a weight off my shoulders because of course there's no such thing as perfection. It doesn't exist, so why strive for it? It's not possible. You can only be as good as you can be in any given circumstance, and that's the lesson, I think, for young children who often have so much expectation placed on them to behave and be good and be nice, and play school doesn't demand that of you. So it was all mind-bogglingly wonderful for me.
And is it fair to say that your work with play school also helped you find your voice or be more confident in your voice in advocating for children? Yes,
because I think, there's an excerpt from a speech I gave in 1990 in the book where I talked about the ubiquity of screens and the inability of a preschool child to contextualise what information they're getting unless someone bothers to do it for them. So I just felt it was really important to emphasise the needs of this age group because they get left behind. And I wrote that speech before the internet, before computers, before any of that stuff. It was just screens and television screens and what was on television and protecting them from inappropriate content that they can't contextualise themselves. It really gave me a mission, I guess, to be a voice because I remembered my conditioning when I started to examine it. I remembered that inability to understand why my parents were so different on a Saturday to the way they were at church on a Sunday. And I remember thinking, if people saw us on a Saturday, what would they think? because inevitably I'd be having a tantrum or I'd be in trouble or my father would be yelling at my brother or my mother would be going, oh, for goodness sake, all of you, and then there was, hello, how lovely to see
that
you.
mask.
Yeah, and I remember being quite baffled by that, but not conscious of what was going on, but seeing the difference.
In your chapter, Advocacy, you write, you've always looked at the arts to tell hard stories and stand up against ineffectual politics. Is it harder now to do that in the arts, given that we've seen blowback when people have tried to tell hard stories in the arts?
I think it's incredibly difficult at the moment. The arts have been slowly getting wedged out of existence as a thing. We no longer have arts pages, we have entertainment pages, which don't deal with the work. They deal with people falling out of nightclubs or their latest facelift. So,
and funding is so difficult.
Funding is appalling. And I reference when I was at uni in the 70s in Adelaide, Don Dunstan was in power and he increased arts funding by a factor of 7. And it was a fecund, wonderful, brilliant environment and people had access to affordable entertainment. Again, one of the problems is it's so expensive to go to the movies, to the theatre. And so gradually, and the arts are being phased out of education as well. It's all STEM, not STEAM. And yet with AI, kids are going to need to be creative. But where are they getting this stimulation for their creativity from? And, algorithms, a small child can't control what algorithms are being pursued by their family. They don't control a remote, so they're getting fed stuff that is not building their characters. It's not building their spirits.
You've also spoken about in your early career battling how people wanted to make you a sex symbol. And why didn't people take you, to quote, seriously until you cut your hair and cried on the Sullivans in that sort of breakthrough moment?
Because I was a young blonde.
Yeah.
And that was, I have an excerpt from an interview at the time, where I started on a show called The Box, which was about the workings of a television station with another young girl who was a model and she had, the most amazing breasts that she loved to flop out at any moment. And I was horrified because we were obviously both meant to be cast as these hot young things. And the second script that I got, but I was so pleased to have a 9-month contract. I mean, that was, whoa, okay. But I was a production assistant in the show, so I didn't think, she was a starlet in it. So I didn't think I'd be that exposed. But the second script that arrived had the most horrific interaction with me and one of the network's pretend stars. And I just was horrified. And I thought, my parents are going to die. They are just going to die. So I went to Hector Crawford, who was the head of the production company, crying and said, I really didn't sign on for this. I didn't say those words. We didn't talk like that then. But I just said, my parents are going to die and I can't do this. And to bless him, he had it modified slightly. But yeah, I mean, that was just, they were the choices that you had. You to pay my dues, I had to fulfil some of those roles. And I played one of the comedy team of the Ernie Sigley show, which was 2 men, 2 women, and the older woman got all the sort of nagging wife shrew roles and I got the, leopard skin negligee roles and that was the way I got my face out there. And yeah, cutting my hair and crying on cue, they went, oh, she's an actress.
Yeah, wow.
Oh, gosh.
So 50 years in the entertainment industry, you no doubt have some MeToo moments, either that you've witnessed or that you've experienced yourself. What was it like witnessing in the past 5 or so years women coming out and telling their stories?
I think it's empowering for all women for stories to be told. For too long we've felt, oh, look, no one will believe us or...
We won't get further work.
Oh, won't get further work. There's always another 20 actors or, people who will be ready to stand in line. But I'm wary of the fact that our industry is focused on just because we're well known. I think these things happen in every workplace. I don't think it's exclusive to show business.
Absolutely not.
And yet we get that, oh, that's a terrible business. But it is empowering. And I think the more people, it's happening more and more and more. And I think that's a wonderful thing because people won't get away with this sort of crap anymore.
Did you ever consider sharing anything that you've experienced?
No, because the power imbalance is so great when you're 22 and some 40-year-old bloke is locking you in a dressing room saying, I'm going to teach you about comedy timing as the key turns in the door.
And that's what happened to you?
That's what happened to me. But I screamed and he let me out. but I got sacked 2 weeks later. We have come a long way, but I see a lot of those advances being wound back. And I think hopefully it's the last gasp of the patriarchy.
Let's hope. Here's hoping. I know that Play School is what you're most proud of, but allow me to share what I adored that you did. Well, most adored because I thought it was hilarious. Your iconic reading of the Go to Fuck to Sleep book, which we're gonna play a little bit of.
The windows are dark in the town, child. The whales huddle down in the deep. I'll read you one very last book. If you swear, you'll go the fuck to sleep.
I mean, what a wonderful, wonderful book. I mean, I know you didn't write it; you voiced it.
I wish I had.
but as a mother, you would know that we all have those bloody moments, and so rarely do we talk, or at any parent, not just a mother, how difficult it is when you're sleep deprived and baby's not sleeping.
Well, that's why I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
My first child was 2 before he slept through the night.
Oh, right.
And the publisher sent me the book, I presume, for an endorsement, and I just laughed like a drain when I read it and said, I have to do this. And although Q&A had me on and set me up with a question, do you think it's irresponsible for, someone who's entertaining children to be doing something like this?
For the love of God.
And promoting it. And I said, I'm not promoting it, you are. So, it's clearly not for children. But I got so much feedback from women particularly saying, oh, thank God,
yes.
I wasn't alone. And we don't talk about it because, and particularly I felt because of Play School, I mean, I should have probably gone to a sleep clinic. But I thought, I can't because people will think, that Noni from Play School should be able to help her child go to sleep.
We all struggle in various ways.
But I didn't know that, because no one talks about it. And on the scale of, interest at a party, if someone says, what do you do? And you say, I'm looking after my newborn baby. They go, oh, how interesting. Moving along to someone else. So on that sort of scale of importance or relevance, people don't feel they can talk about it so much. And that's why, again, women's voices need to be heard so that they realise it's okay, to be struggling.
And you also shared a pregnancy termination for the first time because a relationship was in its death throes. And you wanted to talk about that, as I understand, because it's still mired in misconception and a lot of judgment.
Absolutely. And the current situation in America and indeed in Australia to some extent, where abortion is bandied around as a term of free will as opposed to a medical procedure or something that might save a relationship or save someone's future. I mean, at the time of mine, we had no money. We'd just moved interstate. We had no friends in the place. We had no jobs. And it was very much the tail end of a horrible relationship. So it was inconceivable to me to be able to carry this through and to do the right thing by myself or anybody else. But again, I think it's so misunderstood, this talk of people are aborting babies after birth and no one's pushing back.
Yeah,
no one's saying, I'm sorry, that's complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Absolute nonsense. And it's also, it's just a procedure if someone has a miscarriage, and 1 in 3 pregnancies end in a miscarriage. It's a procedure that's called an abortion, but it's actually a D&C to help clean out the remains of what's there. So it's just the thought that men feel they have the right to make decisions when they're not doctors. They don't understand the term. They don't understand women's bodies clearly or their circumstances is just beyond belief for me. So again, I felt, if more people can say, well, this was my circumstance, I wish that hadn't been so, but I didn't see any alternative.
What's it like then for you witnessing progress being made in many regards towards, well, in relation to women's participation in the workforce? We had our first female Prime Minister. There are things to be applauded. And then in 2024, seeing things like abortion being taken off the table as a option for women in the United States in that kind of language. Like, is it
Or both
despairing or both, there are things to be proud of and things to despair of?
There's things to be vocal about.
That's a good way to put it.
And I think Julia Gillard and now Kamala Harris have both been vilified for being childless.
Yes.
You know, Julia was described as deliberately barren by a fellow politician. Appalling nonsense. As if you're incapable of understanding families or children or love, or unless you've gone that route. No one ever says about a male politician, how do you juggle work and a home life? It's just assumed that there's a little woman at home doing it for them. And inevitably there probably is. So again, I just think we need to be vocal and say it's a struggle for everybody. No one has it that easy. And we need to be empathetic with people, most of whom around us are struggling on some level. I remember someone said to me, I just want to get to the point in life where I don't have to bust a gut. And I said, well, why should you be different to everybody else? Everyone has to bust a gut on some level at some point in their lives. So happiness is not this platform you suddenly step up to.
Yeah, this hierarchy.
It's something that comes and lands on your shoulder for a minute. And if you're alert and alive, you'll appreciate it. But it's not going to be something that you have all the time. No one has that right or privilege.
In writing this book, you've also said that you hope young girls don't make the same mistakes I made.
Yeah.
And that, to the point you've just made, some acting students don't like it when I say you're not special, because if you're special, then someone else isn't. Or just like you've said, if you're going to get to this point where you don't have to slog it out, like we're all slogging it out. That's really interesting, because people like to think that they're exceptional or they're special. And in many ways, you kind of have to be to succeed in entertainment and the arts.
Or in anything, really. Look, we all have talents of some description. We all have a propensity to be good at something, and we all have several things that we're really bad at and we should never attempt. But again, we reduce our own complexity if we reduce ourselves to a single word description. And I think, again, it's okay to understand that you're not perfect. You're unique, but you're not special. Because as I say, if you're special, someone else isn't, and that can't be right. So, but understand and recognise your authenticity, and that there is no one other than you that's like you. And also that that people, as we started off saying, people can't judge you really because they don't know you. So don't let that judgment make you behave in a certain way, because you're squashing your own authenticity if you do that. And it's such a liberation to understand that you can only be yourself. Who else can you be? But, we have social media fighting that, particularly for young kids who believe they have to conform, as we all did. I mean, I had peer pressure too as a child, but not to the extent.
Not as pervasive as it is now.
Not to that extent, no.
You've dedicated this book for the children. Why is that?
Because I think the world's a really scary place for them right now. If I was in my childbearing years now, I'd be very concerned about whether to bring a child into the world. It really feels like we're at a tipping point. And I think they need our care.
What do you mean by tipping point?
On the verge of nuclear war.
Yeah, that's a
sort
pretty
of a tipping
significant
point.
one. Yeah.
Call me old-fashioned, but
climate change, like the climate.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, if there's one nuclear bomb dropped, job done. You know, I mean, all these bombs that are being dropped now, and this horrible hurricane. It's a tipping point on many, many fronts.
Thank you so much for your time, Noni.
My pleasure.
Noni Hazlehurst's memoir, A Place to Call Home, was published by HarperCollins, and it's out now. As I said, I have read it, and I think it would be an excellent stocking filler this Christmas. It's weekend list time. Helen Smith, my producer, but also my colleague who always has her finger on the pulse of what all the cool kids are doing. So I'm always taking notes. Helen, the closest to cool I'll ever be. What are your recommendations?
You give me too much credit, Anne. I'm not that cool.
Okay, just cooler than me. And that bar is pretty low.
Yeah. My first recommendation is something that I've made now twice or three times in the last couple of weeks. It is a mango avocado salsa kind of thing that you put on top of like a chicken schnitzel or a grilled bit of chicken, and it is amazing. Yeah. So mangoes are obviously back in the stores and they've been quite cheap the past couple of weeks, which is great. But all you need to do, it's super simple. It's mango, avocado, lime juice, red onion, fresh coriander if you can. And my mouth is watering.
Yeah.
And then I've also been adding a little bit of this lime chili mayo, just a little smidge, mixing that all around, popping that on top and cucumber to kind of give it a bit more crunch.
And texture, yeah.
Cucumber, mix that all around and pop it on top of like a freshly grilled schnitzel or bit of crumb chicken, or I did it also with a plant-based schnitzel if I was trying to not do, veggie meat. And it's so good and so fresh that you just want to eat it all. And I think it's a great thing for like going into the holiday season if you want to prepare something for a lunch that seems really fancy and like impressive, but it's super easy. That's my go-to now.
I love that. So that's mango, lime juice, red onion, some fresh coriander, and if you want to drizzle a bit of this lime mayonnaise-y thing
and
on
avo
top.
cucumber.
Oh, and avo and cucumber.
Yeah.
It sounds delicious.
It's good.
Sounds a little bit expensive once you get all of the ingredients together.
If this is how I've padded it out.
Okay.
You get a whole cucumber, which it was on special the other day, so less than $2.
Yeah, actually cucumbers are pretty cheap at the moment, so is avocado.
Yeah. So all you need is like one avocado, one big mango, one cucumber, and they kind of pad out quite a bit. Yeah. And then one red onion. If you put the whole red onion in as well, it actually goes quite far. Because you're only doing like a few dollops on top of the chicken or something.
I retract my statement. I actually think because it's
fair.
Seasonal, pretty affordable.
It's seasonal. Yeah, that's the key.
Okay, so I'm really excited about this recommendation because it is an Aussie Christmas movie that is on Stan and it's called Nugget is Dead. I don't know if you have seen the trailer, but it's written by and stars Vic Zerbst and Jenna Owen, who I first started to follow when they had their kind of breakthrough comedy current affairs skit on SBS's The Feed. I found it hilarious. There are echoes of Muriel's Wedding and The Castle because it is a kind of very outer suburban Aussie boganish family at Christmas, and it's centred around Nugget, their dog, who they think is dead. But it's clear that it's made for a more current audience because there's a queer relationship in there as well as some brown people too, and who thought that in 2024 we can actually acknowledge that these people have been in Australia for a very long time. The one thing I will say about it, which makes me love it even more, CBS, the American broadcaster, decided to broadcast it on their TV network. And so if you're going to look up on Rotten Tomatoes, you'll see that the rating it has is so low because American audiences just didn't get it. And they were outraged. And it was so funny because they're kind of like, what? How is this a Christmas movie? Where's the snow? Where's the mistletoe and the love story, which is a very formulaic Hallmark type American Christmas story. And I love Aussie humour, but here are just some of the reviews on Rotten Tomato that you should ignore. Thanks, CBS, for ruining my night. I only made it through 10 or 15 minutes of this mess before I switched over to NBC to watch Law and Order. I mean, alarm bell there, right? Whoever decided this was prime time should be sacked. And this is my favourite. It's so strange because none of the actors sounded Australian to me. And I'm just like, what? Thank you, Australian accent expert.
Yeah.
But they all sound very Australian.
Yeah.
And it is super funny. And I love that Vic and Jenna wrote it and starred in it.
Brian, look what Nugget's done to your dad's Santa undies.
They better not be the ones that Steffi brought me from the city. They're my favourite undies. I wear them every bloody Christmas.
Oh, I love that. I'm definitely going to check that out. We need more Aussie Christmas movies. We don't have enough.
Totally.
We just all have the crap American ones. Sorry, Americans, but like, seriously, come on. My next recommendation, though, is an American thing.
I mean, Americans do so many great things. They just don't understand our humour sometimes.
They don't, which is fine. It's SNL. So I'm back into SNL majorly. Like everyone is recently. I think it's been really just thrown back into the zeitgeist.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
Yeah, I've always been an SNL addict kind of because
so that's
of
Saturday Night Live.
Saturday Night Live. Yes. Yes, sorry. For those
who are not as cool as Helen.
But I've always loved SNL because I did improv school and all of that kind of thing. And it's like the cream of the crop. It's like the best comedians, the best improv people. Like if you're on SNL, you've made it.
Totally.
And you can watch SNL on Binge. You can literally watch full episodes on Binge. So it's so good. But I wanted to recommend Ariana Grande's episode. It was just so good. And everyone online has been saying this as well. We forget she's such an amazing actress. Like, obviously, she's in Wicked right now.
She's so talented.
She is so talented. And yes, she's a diva, but I'm almost like she warrants the diva because she's so good.
Yeah.
And there was this skit that I'm sure, you probably would have seen around. It was the Domingo skit with my obsession right now, my love, Marcelo Hernandez. And he plays this Domingo character in it, and it's a skit parody to the song Sabrina Carpenter's song Espresso.
Yes.
And it's so good. We'll play a little bit here.
Look, I'm sorry I met someone I connected with, but Domingo is in the past.
Kelsey, I'm here.
See, now, if this is Domingo, I'm going to be pissed.
Hey, man, came all this way, had to explain, direct from Domingo. Kelsey's a friend, she's like my sis, but we did hook up though.
What? Well, why would you guys tell me this through song?
I hope we can still be friends.
This skit really skyrocketed him, and I'm so happy about this because he is so funny and so good, and he's bringing this Latino community to SNL that really haven't been spotlighted before like this, and he's just amazing. And he's only like 25 or something, so I am just all for SNL right now. Let's all get around it. I want this show to go on forever and ever and ever, so that is my recommendation.
I love that. And from my understanding, it hasn't been as accessible for an Australian audience, but now you can catch it on Binge.
Yeah, and you can go on YouTube as well. They post heaps of stuff there as well.
Awesome. So my second recommendation is, well, I kind of cheated a little bit because my therapist, and yes, I do see a regular therapist because if you can, you should. Mental health is important, but I've had a particularly trying year, and so I need as much support as possible. And I was talking about trauma and PTSD with my therapist, and she recommended Bessel van der Kolk. He's like the king of trauma. It's a strange title to wear. He's a Dutch psychiatrist and researcher, and he's done kind of 50 years of research on PTSD. He's the leading kind of pioneer in shifting our view that PTSD is something that only happens to extraordinarily traumatic events like soldiers who returned from war, which we know many do have PTSD, many weren't supported, but that trauma is far more common in things like just children growing up who are belted quite significantly by their parents as good old-fashioned discipline.
Yeah.
Or the fact that so many women, I understand the figure is 1 in 5, experience sexual violence or witnessing your parents' domestic violence. That trauma is actually far more common. And so the reason I say I cheated, because he's written a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about changing our thinking about trauma. It has sold 5 million copies worldwide.
Wow.
Van der Kolk is coming to Australia to do a bunch of shows, and my therapist was like, you should really read his book. It's incredible. It's also about natural ways the body can process and deal with trauma that are non-pharmaceutical, like a non-pharmaceutical and drug response to trauma. I didn't read the book. Instead, I'm watching short YouTube clips of Bessel van der Kolk because he just speaks for 8 minutes, and I've watched about 7, 8 minute kind of things where he talks to camera. I'm like, I've got it. I've pretty much read the book. Yeah. So if you want to read the book, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. If you want the easy route like I did, look up his name, Van der Kolk. Holk, not as in the green fighting person, Holk, Holk. And it's super interesting because so many of us have traumatic experiences and our bodies react to it. And he is of the opinion that there were some really simple ways that we can deal with trauma that doesn't include medicine. And that's not to discount the need for prescription drugs in very severe cases, but I'm finding him, super interesting.
Yeah, no, I love this recommendation. My best friend, Tiana, lives in Bali, and she's doing a breathwork course at the moment that is all about, you have talk therapy and then you have the trauma that your body holds. Yes. And it's all about releasing this trauma in your body and going through this breath work motions because your breath is so powerful within your body. And when I actually did the course, I think I recommended it a while ago, but I did a session with her, and he only does it in Bali and Byron Bay, and it's quite full on to be a facilitator. It's years of training. And I was going in a bit like, a bit skeptical, but wow, it is so interesting, and there's so much science to it as well with the trauma that your body actually holds. And talk therapy is great, but also doing things that are physical, your breath and your body is so important and so interesting as well. So I love that. I'm definitely going to check out his videos.
And that is it for this week. Thank you so much for being with us and tuning in. It is a pleasure, as always. If you want more of the Weekend Briefing, you can find us on the Listener app. You can download the Listener app in the App Store and you can follow us there. That way we pop into your feed and you don't even have to look us up again. Otherwise, you can follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on our recommendations. Check out Nugget is Dead, try the breath work, do a shortcut to psychiatry analysis, make the super fancy salsa this Christmas, and you can rate and review every episode if you're feeling inclined to. We'll be back Monday morning where the team will have the latest headlines straight to your headphones along with some really interesting deep dives. Stay safe, everyone, and I will catch you next week.
Listener.